Radical Secular, a video series dedicated to the separation of church and state and the pursuit of justice.
Hello, and welcome back to the Radical Secular. I'm Sean Prophet.
I'm Christophe Difo.
Today, we are going to talk to you about Halloween. Happy Halloween, everybody. We are obviously taping this episode on Halloween 2020. We hope you stayed home and stayed safe because your Halloween mask did not protect you from COVID, folks. If you went to hang out with friends, you probably got exposed, and that's a truly scary Halloween story. We've hit 100,000 new cases, and we're back up to over 1,000 deaths a day, and some people still aren't taking this seriously. Hope you all did. What's on everybody's mind, of course, to the point of total distraction on this Halloween is the 2020 election. It's here. It's upon us. We're in the middle of it. And about 100 million people have already voted, maybe 90-something. But people are voting right now as we speak. By the time this airs, we will be less than 48 hours, folks, 48 hours from potentially knowing who's going to be our next president or not. Could be months before this is settled.
Oh, my God.
It's stressful. And next, we'll be talking about this week in white supremacy. At one of his rallies, Trump replaced the American flag with the flag of what Jeff Sharlet calls police-nationalism. And Daily Beast has a report of, once again, no surprise, rampant white nationalism in the military, police forces, and federal agencies. We're going to check in on our mother continent of Africa. That's going to be an ongoing feature on the Radical Secular. Many African nations are also holding or have recently held elections. Ivory Coast, Tanzania, and Algeria. And Zambia failed to amend its constitution, which is a good thing because it was a terrible amendment. We'll tell you all about that. In this week's example of creeping libertarianism, Elon Musk has declared Mars to be a government-free zone.
Unreal.
Next, we'll discuss our main topic of the week, which is that terrible ideas have terrible consequences. We're going to be going into, in depth, the ideas that led us to Trumpism, starting with Reaganist libertarianism. Finally, we will have our Radical Solutions segment. I'll give you a hint. This week's solution is super short and simple. I think you can probably guess what we're going to say. Of course, we'll go off the radical radar for a few minutes later in the show. But before we get into any of that, I want to first remind you to make sure and subscribe to this podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're watching this on YouTube, hit that red subscribe button. Be sure to give us a 5-star rating on your podcast host. Write us a review. This is new. Write us a review at Apple. We found out this week that positive podcast reviews will help get us into their recommendation list faster than almost anything else. So tell your friends and family, write us a review. Word of mouth matters.
Write it.
And second, I want to plug the Just Words Fallacy Medium publication. We have an article this week about deepfakes. Check it out. Just Words Fallacy posts articles from progressive, diverse authors related to politics, religion, and justice. Just Words Fallacy is the narrative companion to the Radical Secular podcast. Link is in the show notes. If you're interested in publishing your work on the Just Words Fallacy publication, here is our contact info.
Email us at theradicalsecular@gmail.com. Follow us on Instagram @radical_secular. Follow us on Twitter @radicalsecular. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, podcasts at Apple, Google, Spotify, and Stitcher.
Okay, now that I've got my mask off, we can talk about t-shirts. My t-shirt this week is
Biden-Harris. Love it. Classic. Right from the store. I know because I have a similar shirt, and it's great because it's actually, these are made, union made in the United States. And it is the classic Biden-Harris sign with the three sort of bars as the E. And I think that's really funny because I was watching something on late night, so one of the late night shows, and when they go to one of the Trump rallies, they got a guy who goes to Trump rallies, and this woman swears that those three lines are a sign of socialism, that Biden is a socialist and a communist.
Socialism. Oh, well, we have a lot to say about that later. That's ridiculous. Anyway, this is my last chance to wear a Biden-Harris t-shirt before it either becomes a collector's item or a sad reminder. So I figured I'd wear it today. How about you? What do you got?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am wearing also a Biden shirt. It's not Biden-Harris, it's Biden, but I bought this on the website, and it's African Americans for Joe Biden Harris, and here it is.
Oh, yeah. Just says Joe in big letters. It has a brown, orange, and tan stripe for the E, and it's awesome. That's really great.
Yeah, super simple, but I like it. I think it's pretty straightforward. I mean, it's a shirt that I would wear anyway. I think it's, I would wear it out. I think it's a cool shirt, and hopefully it, like you say, it doesn't become obsolete. Let's hope.
Yeah, let's hope. So you're going to wear that tonight for, are you going to a Halloween party? What are you doing?
Oh, we got no plans. I'm planning to sit at home and maybe watch some TV, but relax. Lindsay and I will probably watch something together, or something real simple. We are not really Halloween people. We never really have been. We're the kind of people who like turn off our lights so the kids don't go to the door. We're like, I'm sorry. I know how terrible that sounds. I really do, but we're just not into it. We're just not into it. So, although, look, if there were a party tonight, we were talking before, if there were a party, we'd go to it because parties are fun, regardless of what the theme is. Parties are fun. But of course, this COVID-19 era, and there are no fucking parties. Yeah,
no, that's smart. It's smart. And like we said, Halloween mask won't protect you. Well, other than that, what's the scariest thing for you about this Halloween?
Oh, my God, man, the scariest thing. I mean, it's the election. I mean, that is the obvious thing. But dumb
question, I know.
but still, I think it's important, right? Because what is it that I fear, right? And what I fear, if anything, and I think we talked a little bit about this last week, is the mechanics of it all, right? And look, the Supreme Court has telegraphed what their approach is, and Trump has telegraphed what their strategy is, which is run up the numbers so it's as close as possible, and then pass it off to the Supreme Court, which is now full of partisan hacks. Kavanaugh and Barrett are the most obvious examples of that hackery, and so that's the kind of stuff that's what keeps me up. That is terrifying to me. It's more terrifying right now than global warming, although that is sort of the looming existential threat. The
court with Barrett on there is going to be very hostile to any sort of climate remediation or action. Any sort of laws that we want to pass to save ourselves. These guys are going to go, no, that's bad for corporations. Sorry.
Absolutely. And I heard. This is what's terrifying. And I heard this earlier this week. I heard this, and that is, it's really easy to look at Kavanaugh and look at Barrett and be like, oh, these are partisan hacks. And they are partisan hacks. I mean, they're clear partisan hacks in a way that the other even conservative justices haven't been. I mean, look, Barrett appears in essentially a promo on, like, coming out on the veranda there with. Mm-hmm. On the portico there with Trump. I mean, and she didn't have to do that. She didn't have to do that, right? This was after she'd already been cemented she didn't have to go. Like, that is not what Supreme Court justices do. They don't do that. They have to at least pretend to be impartial.
Did you see the submissive look on her face? There's a photo of her looking at Donald Trump, and it is terrifying. The look of submission on her face and just abject, just obsequious fawning over him is unbelievable. And it just, And you've got this family, the Trump family is so callous and so, and this is what scares me is on Fox, Donald Trump Jr. was interviewed and he said that the cases of COVID were down to almost nothing. Now that's exactly the opposite of the truth. Okay. There's 1,000 cases or 1,000 deaths a day and 100,000 cases. So basically that's a person drowning to death alone every 86 seconds, an American. And that to Donald Trump Jr., that's nothing.
That's nothing. And I think Eric Trump was on talking about how he was on the Laura Ingram show. Like, God, I can't stand that woman. But she, and obviously that whole apparatus, but he was on the show and talking about how it's not COVID-19 that people are worried about right now. It is the biggest thing. This is him saying this. I'm not quoting exactly, but I'm paraphrasing. But he said the biggest thing that Americans care about right now is left-wing bias on social media platforms. He said that the problem is so pervasive. Problem is so pervasive that is what Americans are worried about right now, and that's why they're going to the polls. These are the words that come out of his mouth, not COVID-19. It couldn't possibly be the rampant death and destruction.
You do remember. You do remember that in 2016, that this was the whole thing. This is why Trump won, because you guys were mean to us on social media.
Right.
It's crazy. It's nuts.
Crazy.
This is their value system, and Trump himself, he's the ultimate troll. His claim is COVID.
God.
He said it like 10 times, and he said it's all fake news. It's directed personally at him,
of course,
to try to stop his rallies and ruin his reelection, and to stop conservatives from gathering. Like, we want only conservatives not to gather, right? We're not worried about liberals.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And meanwhile, Biden is doing exactly what he's supposed to be doing in terms of the gatherings, right? The drive-in rallies, which I think is a genius idea.
It's genius.
It's genius. It's brilliant. So you can beep your horn. You have to stay within arm's length of your car, so you can still be around people, but still, but it's really well contained. And what he is doing is projecting this message, right? A message of competence, of compassion, and taking this thing seriously. And as we've talked about extensively on this show, the COVID-19, regardless of what Trump does or pretends, or his sycophants pretend is what's happening, COVID-19 is number one issue on people's minds. And it's because literally it affects everyone's life, but also it's affecting the economy. So normally people say people vote on the economy. Yes, but you cannot separate COVID-19 from the economy right now.
You can't. And, of course, he says this is going to go away November 4th, that there's zero chance of that happening. And as a matter of fact,
literally zero.
All fall and winter, we're going to be in a crisis mode. We may very well have to re-enter a full lockdown. The UK just today announced that they are re-entering a full and complete lockdown. So, I mean, how could he get away with this shit and expect to be reelected? I don't know.
I don't know either. But really, Sean, we really do know, right? Because first of all, white supremacy. We cannot discount, and the hierarchy that we talk about, we cannot discount people's commitment to white supremacy and to the hierarchy as it exists. That's number one. Number two is voter suppression and voter intimidation. Number three is the unelected power of the courts and the judiciary, which is why they know, like Mitch McConnell especially, there is nothing stupid about Mitch McConnell. There's a lot of stupid things about the Trumps, but there's nothing stupid about Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell is brilliant, an evil genius, and he knows, he sees the writing on the wall, right? Back in 2008, Democrats won with an unbelievably powerful online funding machine, right? So what they did was the first thing John Roberts did was Citizens United. One of the first things he did was Citizens United. So that's the only way the Republicans can compete, right? Number two, 2012, Democrats win with a super diverse coalition and record voter turnout. And what do? They got the Voting Rights Act so that you're able to suppress the vote. So and Mitch McConnell is behind, is the engine, part of the engine behind all of this. And my point is that he is packing the course because he knows the only way they retain power right now is through minority rule. That's the only way. And that is how they intend to win elections going forward, brazenly.
Yeah, and I kind of feel like a broken record because we say this all the time, but this could be our last election as we know it, because they have decided that we don't really get to vote.
Exactly.
I mean, 100 million people have voted. We don't know if those ballots are going to be counted. We've never been in modern America in a place where the major argument of an election is not who will get the most votes, but the argument is now about whether certain votes should even count. And it's gone, as you've said, it's gone way beyond voter suppression. I mean, they are in court every single election trying to reduce polling places, cut down on drop-off locations, reduce voting hours, challenging mail-in ballots. They're challenging signatures in Democratic areas. Anywhere there's a large population of people of color, they're scrutinizing every ballot now. They have thousands of people scrutinizing ballots. They're not even pretending anymore. And then this postal service thing, like if they had, if these modifications, you could possibly understand that a Republican president would want to privatize the postal service, but he's had 4 years to do it. And the fact that he got this guy in there right now, this DeJoy or whatever his name is, he is a huge donor. And he is someone who was brought in right this summer, just this summer, not like 4 years ago when he first got elected, but just this summer to mess with the mail, knowing that COVID was on the rampage and knowing that we were going to be heavily depending on mail-in ballots. So at this point, elections are not anymore about policy. They're just procedural contests. Who can abuse the law to get elected?
That is absolutely right. And Republicans, Republicans know that if they talk about their policies and are honest about them, that they will lose because their policies are deeply, deeply unpopular, right? Americans have a typical idea of fairness, even conservative Americans, even, right? Because even conservative Americans think, and I'm not talking about the cult of 45, right? That's a specific 35% of the population, right? That is of the voter population. Those numbers are general, but right, they are specific, and those people are not bright, and they're not aware, and they live in a media ecosystem that just consistently reinforces their belief system and shields them from information that disconfirms their already pre-existing beliefs, right? So, whatever, put those people in a bucket. But most Americans, even conservative Americans, have a general idea of fairness, right? They don't think that rich people should not pay taxes. They don't think that that privatizing everything is the solution to problems. People do want solutions on climate change. They don't want to live under pollution. People, like we talked about in the past, people do want new green progressive jobs, right? And again, and people want this, but we are living in an environment now that Trump knows this. They know this, man. They know this because they know that their base lives in an ecosystem that is impenetrable, and the rest of us, they can suppress our votes. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that keeps me up at night, man. This is the kind of stuff that keeps me up at night. This is the kind of stuff that keeps me fired up and pissed off.
The thing about it is that their idea of themselves, this 35% that you're talking about, their idea of themselves is highly magnified because they keep getting told by Fox News that they're right. They keep getting told that they're winning, that the polls are fake, the news is fake, everything's fake. And sometimes they're correct because the election is rigged in their favor. So they actually believe they're not accountable to democracy. And so this whole fuck your feelings attitude is really fuck everybody else, fuck the other voters, fuck majority rule.
Yep, that's absolutely right. That is absolutely right. It's really, really terrifying. And you know, I have over the last week, just like any other decent progressive person in America, or any decent person in America, has been watching the polls and has said and woken up every morning terrified, right, with anxiety. And look here, and I've heard this, and I think it's the right way to approach this. We should be concerned. We should be taking this very, very seriously. But like you said last week, we are winning. Let's not forget that, right? We are winning, and what the way that we sidestep all the bat shittery, as that is such a Sean term, bat shittery and rat fuckery. That's another Sean term. On the right, from the Supreme Court on down, is win in like 5 points or better. In Pennsylvania, 5 points or better in Wisconsin, 5 points or better, right? That's how we do this. And so I think that the attitude to have here is we need to work our asses off for the next 4 days or whatever, however long it is. Jesus Christ, it's so fucking close, dude.
It's so soon. It's so soon. Well, since there's nothing else we can do about that, let's move on to the rest of our news. I want to talk about the thing that is not going to be solved by Joe Biden winning the election, and that is the white supremacy problem that we have in America. I think he can make a big difference because he can actually change how the police are funded. He can change the Justice Department, the way that the consent decrees, he can bring those back, the ones that Jeff Sessions got rid of. And there are ways that the federal government can rein in the police, but that's not going to change this groundswell of white supremacy. And I wanted to read something by Jeff Sharlet, which I mentioned earlier in the opening. He is the writer of the book The Family, which became a Netflix series, and I'm friends with him on Facebook. And he wrote a really insightful piece on Facebook about police nationalism and the Blue Lives Matter flag. So I'm going to just read the whole thing because it's worth it. It's going to take about 5 minutes, but it's still worth it. So he says, first, the black, white, and blue anti-Black Lives Matter flag flew outside of Trump rallies, then on stage next to the U.S. flag. In Wisconsin last week, it replaced the U.S. flag behind Trump. Now, the American flag, with all its complications, is just gone, and a fascist banner waves. Growing dominance of Blue Lives Matter flags within Trumpism suggests a formation close to, but not identical with, both white nationalism and the police state. I'll call it police nationalism. Identity founded on the fetishization of an explicitly brutal and implicitly racist idea of policing. Police nationalists, like the civilian creator of the Blue Lives Matter flag, are mostly not law enforcement. Rather, they are people who form an identity, a sense of themselves, through fantasizing about punishment for others, hence the popularity of the Punisher motif. Police nationalists are white supremacists, including occasional non-white ones, it's definitely an infectious disease, who don't want to think of themselves as such. Police nationalism allows them to fetishize force as law and relieves them of having to think about what law is. Police nationalists often merge law and order with an authoritarian idea of Christianity, but in essence I think it's a secularization of an authoritarian faith, fetishization of a fixed received law and order similar to fundamentalist natural law with state power replacing divine. Now I want to stop for a second here because Christophe, you know, we've actually talked about natural law and what natural law does. And I just think this is something that it's really nice to see Jeff Sharlet picking up on that theme.
Totally. I think that, and boy, he there's so much packed in there, and we can talk more about it later. But yeah, the natural law issue is critical, and I think it gets, again, I think it connects back to hierarchy and the importance of that in that sort of right wing ideology.
Yeah, and when you invoke natural law, something that is given from God, you don't have to explain yourself, and that's a theme we hit over and over and over again.
Absolutely.
So Jeff Sharlet continues. You may have seen a popular meme of the anti-Black Lives Matter police nationalist flag with stripes pulled away to reveal a Nazi flag. I get the sentiment, but it obscures the fact that this authoritarian flag is now at least far more versatile in its service to neo-fascism. That's because the Nazi flag only means one thing. The police nationalist flag now means many things. Anti-Black Lives Matter, which is how it began. It means Trump, and yes, a martyred memory of officers killed in the line of duty. It's like Trump, it twists. I've been reporting on the right for 20 years. I believe self-definition matters. Police nationalists are now calling their flag Back the Blue, a statement they experience not as nonpartisan, but as transcending partisanship. It's an assertion of ultimate authority. But worse, implicit in the slogan Back the Blue, when used by police nationalists, is the fantasy of a coming conflict which aligns neatly with QAnon's idea of a storm, in which backing the blue will mean choosing a side in a civil war not so much feared as anticipated. Police nationalists endorse police violence under cover of police benevolence. One often finds them trading memes of cops with little kids, often a little blonde white girl, or, thought to immunize against charges of racism, a little black boy. The police nationalist memes of cops with kids are not false. Police, for all the profound and fundamental problems with American policing, often do good things. One can recognize that and still see police nationalism for what it is, the replacement of civil authority with armed power, framed in the twin sentimentalisms of innocence and violence.
Wow. Man. And yeah, obviously I read that before, but it's really powerful to hear it now. My initial reaction to it is, and I know the comparisons to the Nazi state aren't exact, but and also the connection to the run up to the Nazi state aren't exact, right? But the brown shirts and the thugs, that is what comes to mind right away for me. It is that this idea, this sort of almost paramilitary idea, and again, it's not a perfect analogy because because here we have the Bugaloo Boys, right?
We did use that blue striped flag with it pulled back to reveal a Confederate flag on the just words fallacy in our article. So we have definitely made those parallels before, but I think what he's saying is right. It's not the Confederate flag and it's not the Nazi flag. It's something completely, this is a new unique thing. Form of American fascism.
Absolutely. Like fascism has come to America, man. It has come to America. It is wrapped in the flag. And the idea, I saw this, I think I saw this on Twitter as well. This idea of the fact that the American flag has been replaced, not next to but replaced by this flag is super, super important. And
it's super important.
It's super important. And in the world that we live in, that is every day is another Trump disaster. Every day is another sort of neo-fascist move, or authoritarian impulse. It's easy to sort of shrug our shoulders and say, okay, well, that's that. But this is super, super, super important. And any space that used to exist between the sort of thin blue line and legitimate policing and this movement and white supremacy, any light that used to exist between those two things is now completely gone.
Well, you look at it metaphorically, and that is that, okay, this is an American flag, but it has been drained of color. Okay, the blood of patriots is what was represented by the red stripe in the flag, and the people who actually bled to establish our country with its laws and its constitution and all of those things. But furthermore, there's a more even sinister metaphor, and that is that the rest of the flag is now black and white. And who controls the relationship between black and white people in America is the cops. Mm-hmm. That's what they're saying. And so if I, as a white person, want to pass laws and vote for laws that are inclusive, that are, and to see black people treated fairly, I can't do that because I've got to go through the cops. They're the ultimate deciders of this thing. And it's really, really, really fucking scary.
It really is scary. And obviously this is why this election is so critical, and it's so important, not just to win, but to repudiate Trumpism and this neo-fascism. Let's call it what it is. I mean, right? It's neo-fascism. It's neo-fascism. Let's not call it Trumpism. Let's call it neo-fascism, because that's what we're talking about here. And if you look at fascist organizations and fascist countries throughout history, this is precisely how it happens. I mean, this is precisely how it happens. And it happens when people are afraid of, people look, right? We talk a lot on this show about the human animal. Mm-hmm. And human animal in social situations and in society. And we see this over and over again when democracy begins to falter. And by that, I mean, when the government ceases to be able to provide what it needs to provide, what it should be providing for people, they look to a strong man to break through the gridlock, right? And we saw this in the Weimar Republic. We saw this in Germany. We've seen this all around the world, and now we are seeing it here, right? Where wealthy, powerful interests have essentially ground the government to a halt through their power, and then rather than looking, and democratic forces are then unable to sort of give the people what they need, and so the people, and then that's a perfect conditions for an authoritarian strongman to come in and say, "Don't worry, I will give you easy, straightforward, clear answers." And even on those MAGA flags, right, it says "No more bullshit," right? Yeah. This idea that he's going to cut through the democratic process.
That's exactly what it means. And we have to, what makes this, I want to touch on this briefly before we move on, because we got to move on. But
sure.
This is the Daily Beast ran an article, and what happened is a nonprofit media collective called Unicorn Riot managed to get their hands on hundreds of thousands of leaked group texts. And this is from this is among people who are members of the Boogaloo Boys, and the boys, as we love to make fun of them. But they are looking at trying to target civilians, and they are looking at trying to foment civil war. And we did see them actually plan to kidnap and execute an American state governor. And so this is a real issue. And last week, we talked about the need for a warrior class to protect society, but that only works when warriors and protectors are under civilian control to protect the whole tribe. What we have right now is that essentially our police and their supporters, like the Boogaloo Boys, are only interested in protecting the white tribe. And they also are trying to protect an absence of accountability for law enforcement. So basically the law enforcement becomes identical to the law.
Absolutely. That's so true. And that's a really important distinction, like an important connection you just made there, right? The law enforcement becomes the law. The law enforcement is it's no longer enforcing a civilian created laws. It is the law, right? It is now just an instrument of power, right? It is just the hands and the arms of power of a handful of powerful interests. And we talked at the top of the show, we talked about minority rule. And they are the enforcers now of power, because that's what minority rule is, right? It's just raw power necessarily, right?
And that dovetails right with the Punisher fantasy and all of that.
Exactly.
These people see themselves as comic book characters. They really do.
They really, really do. And you've talked about this, and that is the problem with superheroes in general, right? And look, I like the Marvel comics. I like the Marvel universe as much as the next guy, but the problem with that is this idea that we should just accede our decision making, our problem solving to some magical force, right? That is all powerful and that is just going to solve these problems. And again, it dovetails with religious thinking. It dovetails with authoritarian thinking, and it's a problem. It's a problem when you start thinking of yourself as, like you say, a superhero who's going to do a cosplay dude who's going to run out in the streets, and next thing you know, you're in Kenosha and you're shooting. Yeah. Protesters, right? That's where that ends. That's where that ends.
Superheroes, aliens, gods, it's all the same thing.
It's all the same thing. It's all the same thing. All gods matter. All gods matter. To hark back to one of our earlier shows.
Yeah, and this stuff is a huge problem. It's definitely going to outlast Trump, and that's going to be a major challenge for us going forward. And I want to put this in some stark terms because we're going to talk about Africa now. And Africa is a cautionary tale about where we could be if we're not careful. And you're going to see this as we go through what's going on. Ivory Coast is voting today. There have been threats of violence, and many people are stocking up on food and leaving the cities. Reports on Facebook of people being hacked to death have spooked the population. I mean, when we hear the word hacked, we think of a computer, right? These are people actually being hacked with machetes. It's fucking insane. So this is definitely going to reduce the number of people who are voting. Only about 3 million of 7.5 million registered voters have collected their voting cards, and about 235,000 voting cards have been stolen or burned. President Alassane Ouattara is running for an illegal third term in office. So this election is taking place right now while we're taping this show. But wow, does this sound familiar? Guy getting an illegal third term, ballot tampering, threats of violence. Holy crap. I mean, we wish the people of Ivory Coast well, and we hope that democracy prevails. Stay tuned. Situation is a little different in Tanzania. Tanzania just held an election last Friday. President John Magufuli was declared the winner of a second term amid allegations of widespread election fraud. He received 84% of the vote, while the opposition candidate Tundu Lissu got 13%. What were we saying about dictator voting margins?
Literally last week we were talking about this, these sort of comical, disparities. Wait, come on, come on! You're talking about 85. You take the 85% of people to agree on anything.
I feel terrible for the people of Tanzania. I mean, we're laughing at them, but it's just this is what we face the same issue here right now. Absolutely. I mean, it's not quite as bad as this, but
dark humor, right? Gallows humor, man. Gallows humor.
Yeah. So Mafuli's ruling Chama Cha Mapinduzi party also won an absolute majority in parliament. So he's a dictator. Sure. Lissu has rejected the vote while alleging widespread irregularities and called for peaceful demonstrations. The opposition asserts that thousands of observers were turned away from polling stations on Wednesday, and that at least a dozen people were killed on the eve of the vote in the semi-autonomous region of Zanzibar. Internet and text messaging service slowed dramatically or disappeared. They cut off the internet for these people.
Unbelievable.
The vote marked the most significant backsliding in Tanzania's democratic credentials. Tanzania Elections Watch, a group of regional experts, said in an assessment released Friday. It noted a heavy deployment of military and police whose conduct created a climate of fear. Where have we heard this?
Seriously, Jesus Christ. I mean, this really is just further down the path that we are on as a country. It is terrifying.
It's terrifying. So it continues, the electoral process so far falls way below the acceptable international standards for holding free and fair elections, the group said. The opposition alleges widespread irregularities, including double voting and ballot box seizing by security forces or other authorities. The East African nation is one of Africa's most populous countries and fastest growing economies. Magufuli has pointed to the country's achievement of lower middle income status as one reason he deserves another term. But observers say Tanzania's reputation for democratic ideals is crumbling, with Magufuli accused of severely stifling dissenting voices in his first 5-year term. Opposition political gatherings were banned in 2016, the year after he took office. Media outlets have been targeted. Some candidates were arrested or blocked from campaigning or disqualified ahead of the vote.
Wow. Jesus Christ. I mean, it's I was having a conversation with somebody, a friend of mine online, and we were talking about how, in America at this point, there isn't a jackboot on our throats in that same way, right? It's not 1984, but it really smacks a lot more of a Brave New World, and that is that, because, right, we have our classes, but mostly we have Soma, right? So you have people that are so disconnected. Are so connected to reality TV or sports or whatever else that sort of distracts them from the realities of what's going on around them, and don't realize themselves, our country, sliding slowly into dystopia, right? Because people are so distracted. So you have a media ecosystem on the right, obviously, but also you have average people who just don't take this seriously, right? And they think it's a joke, Mm-hmm. It's not until there is a person who is running for a third term and literally seizing ballot boxes that it all becomes very real.
Well, the fascists know that these kind of tuned out, bread and circuses type voters need their distractions, and so they make sure that nothing will happen to those distractions. Those distractions will continue, and people will be able to escape into sports and all those things. And a lot of people will just decide that democracy is not really that important to them as long as they can, have the guys over for a couple of beers and watch a game.
Exactly.
So, all right, well, let's move on to Algeria. In Algeria, a constitutional referendum will be held on November 1st. It's a series of government reforms that is being pitched as an improvement to democratic accountability. But there is widespread cynicism, and many people are tearing up posters for the referendum. There are videos on Twitter today of huge piles of ripped up posters filling the streets with people stomping on them. The trouble started when 4-term Algerian President Abdelaziz Bouteflika announced that he was running for a 5th term in February 2019. Bouteflika was involved in a massive corruption in cronyism scheme, including building a $2 billion mosque as a monument to himself, and was also rumored to have suffered a stroke. Of course, who do you believe? How do you know whether the guy had a stroke or not?
Exactly. Jesus.
After massive street demonstrations, the military forced Bouteflika to step down in April of 2019 and arrested many of his cronies. Current President Abdelmajid Tebboune was elected in December 2019 and is pushing the constitutional referendum, which would, among other things, give the president veto power over all laws, complete control of the judiciary without parliamentary consultation for judicial appointments, and give him executive authority over the entire government bureaucracy.
No conflict of interest there. I mean, come on. I mean, oh boy. We laugh, but it's not funny, right? Because this is happening all over the world, man. And democracies that don't have the same length of basically like momentum that we have or had are crumbling in the face of this stuff.
Well, this is why it's important for us to look at these things in Africa, because right now we have been always the country that has had solid, free and fair elections. And we've been the one, if anything, interfering in other people's elections. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
And so now we've got Russia, China, Iran, whoever possibly interfering in our elections. We've got big money with its thumb on the scale. We've got all these things, and we're headed for this same status we're a corrupt, flawed democracy at this point. We're not a real democracy anymore.
No. And what's worse is that there's people who just don't care about that. Like a huge chunk of Americans are just like, yeah, that's fine. As long as I get what I need, like you say, my sports, and as long as I'm in power and I got money and my taxes are not going to people that I think or don't deserve them, then I'm fine with it.
Yeah. Well, it's discouraging. So again, good luck to Algeria. The final note on Africa is in Zambia. A bit of good news, small piece of good news. Parliament defeated a similar constitutional amendment that would have given current head of state Edgar Lungu the authority to implement redistricting in advance of the August 2021 elections, as well as given him complete control over central bank monetary policy. So that failed.
Right. Well, a little bit of good news. We'll take it where we can get it, right?
We will. But God, a bunch of dictators on parade.
Seriously,
shit.
man. Seriously. And yeah, it's scary. And I really, I was talking to the same person online, and I call myself an Obama Democrat. And I said this, I think, probably last week as well. And that is that I have hope. I do. And I think that, and I'm resolute, right? And I think that I think that we can, as a society, do better. I think a huge part of that is going to be our country, the United States of America, repudiating this and starting a trend, right? And really becoming a leader in recovering democracy from these despots worldwide.
Yeah, if we aren't there, China's not going to stop the despots.
Definitely
Russia's not going to stop the despots.
No.
Brazil, India, they're all run by despots at this point.
Exactly. We are the last line of defense for democracy, man. All right, that's not true. Angela Merkel is really the last line of defense. The EU and is really the last line of defense. But again, we as the United States are the standard bearer for democracy and civilian government and checks and balances, most importantly. And so, and no, we have not been perfect. We have not been perfect. No. Understatement. But we are the best positioned to be the vanguard of a new democracy and defeat new neo-fascism. We have
absolutely,
to be.
And
we
have an army. We have a military that is second to none, and so we actually have the capacity to take on some of these other countries, which, frankly, Merkel doesn't.
Exactly. We have the infrastructure, literally worldwide infrastructure, right, that no other country has. And that's why when people need help, they turn to the United States, because we just have the infrastructure. Like if you need something done in the middle of nowhere in Eastern Europe or in Africa, wherever, who else is going to be able to fly airplanes there? No, really, there's only a handful of us. And America will show up. We'll show up with an aircraft carrier if we have to, right? And to battle with, and an amphibious assault ship of Marines. Right. That gets people's attention. Gets people's attention real quick.
It does, but all of that is under the control of our ballot boxes, which are now being tampered with. So
exactly.
This is a good segue to our next topic, which is really the main topic of our show, which is how did we get here and what kind of ideas put us in this situation? And lo and behold, Elon Musk, who we normally like to think of as a good guy, he is definitely not on the side of the angels here. He has declared Mars to be a government-free zone. In the terms of service for its new Starlink internet service, SpaceX has declared that the laws of Earth will not apply. Now, granted, this is a big future problem. This is probably 20 years into the future. But the idea is that we are in the process of potentially extending our civilization, and the people who are in charge of that project don't believe in our system of government. So it's completely batshit. Let me read what he says. He says, for services provided on Mars or in transit to Mars via Starship or other colonization spacecraft, the parties recognize Mars as a free planet that has no Earth-based government, and no Earth-based government has authority or sovereignty over Martian activities. Accordingly, disputes will be settled through self-governing principles established in good faith at the time of the Martian settlement. Well, who's in charge of that self-government? Elon Musk or whoever's running SpaceX, right?
Yeah.
This is corporate fascism, folks.
Wow. And, and this is really deeply troubling, Sean, and it's troubling from a lot of perspectives. But I think one of the biggest problems here is first the fantasy that if you just get rid of government, that everyone will just figure it out on their own. It's a fantasy. It's a fallacy. It is a gross misunderstanding of human nature. And like you say, corporate fascism. And this is why I think one of the biggest problems with having, I mean, I'm really happy that Elon Musk is doing what he's doing in general, but this is one of the biggest problems when you defund the government. And so NASA can't do this kind of stuff, right?
Not anymore.
So NASA, and so now this has been privatized and outsourced in some way, which I guess is good for good ideas. But the problem is, here we are. This is exactly the problem. The question is now, who's going to run Mars? And it's going to be a corporate libertarian paradise? I mean,
yeah.
What the fuck?
Well, this is it. And we have to really talk about it. And we're probably going to go long, but this is our libertarianism segment, because we've in passing sort of ripped on libertarians, but we really haven't gone through the full diatribe of why this is such a terrible idea. And we need to do it, because this is what has gotten us here, starting with Reagan. So
for sure.
The Republican Party has just gone full libertarian, and all of their supporters, from the Koch brothers to Chicago School of Economics, Milton Friedman. This is an old story that's been going on for our entire lives. But it really was a repudiation of the New Deal and the idea of the Great Society and all of the things that Democrats have been trying to put in place for the last 100 years to make a fair society. So let's dive into that. Libertarianism in general sounds good. Freedom, after all, do whatever you want. The second part of the statement, in any kind of reasonable civilization, is so long as it doesn't hurt anyone else. But that whole idea has become a kind of a cruel joke. It's often a footnote, at the very least parenthetical. Freedom and liberty are in some form the subject of nearly every political philosophy and even every religion. You heard this in Genesis, and God blessed them, and God said unto them, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth and subdue it and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the fowl of the air and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. The idea that's Genesis 1:28. And that is the idea that man has dominion. Man should do whatever, it should be free to do whatever he or she wants with the earth. So that sets us up for a real problem with religion.
Yeah. What wasn't this one asshole recently who went out and said that, that the earth was never meant for us to, it's basically ours to do whatever we want. And it's basically like disposable.
Yeah, it's disposable.
Right? Disposable.
And it's this idea, it's the cornucopian idea that we just take. We take and we don't give.
Right.
And that is right in Genesis. And this is why we're radically secular, because religion sets us up for a fall this way. We can't survive with 8 billion people on a planet that we're treating as disposable.
Exactly. And we're nowhere near the point where, because there's a lot of these arguments like, well, yeah, we'll just go to a different planet. It'll be fine. It's like, the insanity of that statement, where we are unable to even live. We are happy to have a space station that we can live on, let alone you live. And that is no life. Living like an astronaut is not like living on Earth.
Let's discuss the bounty of Earth. We could have a whole episode on this, but briefly, Mars is like living in something drier than the Sahara Desert with no oxygen. That's what it is.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Come on. And it's red.
So you got to bring everything with you, everything you want. Maybe there's water there. They can melt water from underground, but they can't, there's no, terraforming the place would take centuries or thousands of years. And it's not going to happen in any kind of time frame that would make any difference to us.
Right.
So that's a whole, I'd love to do a show on that, actually, because it's really interesting and fun to think about. But it's not just, so it's not just Christianity or the Bible. It is even Aleister Crowley and the Satanic Bible. There is no law beyond do what thou wilt. Love is the law, love under will. And this was interestingly an echoing of something that was said by the Christian St. Augustine of Hippo. Same quote. And John Stuart Mill on liberty, he says, a person may cause evil to others not only by his actions, but by his inaction. And in either case, he is justly accountable to them for the injury. So actually, John Stuart Mill, who is the sort of the patron saint of libertarianism, has kind of told these guys they're full of shit. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. And Mill is the patron saint of this, but we'll get into it. But the bottom line is that libertarian overlooks the externalities, right? I mean, the externalities, and you cannot run a global. You can't run a civilization. You just simply can't run a civilization that way.
No, and of course that is the classic freedom from versus freedom to, which we've always talked about many times. And in the case of COVID, it's the freedom to walk around in public without a mask versus the freedom from being free from the risk of infection. No society can function without resolving those kind of conflicts. And the same thing goes through my freedom to burn and coal roll in my big truck is in conflict with other people's freedom to be free from pollution. So it's an unresolvable thing, and you have to resolve that through courts and laws that balance interests. Exactly.
And this, I hate, God, libertarians drive me fucking nuts. But the idea that freedom, it's such a very narrow idea of what freedom is, and we're going to talk about, let's talk about freedom of the mind first, and then we'll get back to that.
Yeah, well, this is the big thing: free speech, freedom of conscience, and so that's the first liberty that the libertarians discuss. And what they're not really understanding is that there are huge problems with the idea of free will, and chief among those is there is no free will. We have this illusion, but that illusion comes from the blank slate, which we talked about last.
Exactly.
Any ideas that arise in our minds are predictable. So if we don't pay attention to our own evolved mental tendencies, we'll tend to deny those tendencies in others, leading to all sorts of sentimentality, the just world fallacy, which is what we've named our Medium publication after. And
exactly
that whole trash bag of ideas that proceeds from those awful false assumptions.
Absolutely, man. And we've talked about this before, and we really should do a whole free will episode, because there's different perspectives on this, but I tend to fall into the determinist camp. It's hard to prove, obviously, but what I can say for absolute certain is that there is only a very small portion of our minds and our brains are even conscious, right? So much of what we do on absolute autopilot. So so even if there is some part of my mind that I am, some sort of my mind that I'm in control of, or some sort of my will, part of my will that I'm in control of, most of what I do, including my facial expressions, ranging from my facial expressions to my implicit biases, to how I respond to stimuli, is completely out of my control. So it really begins to undermine the fundamental premise of the libertarian.
Mm-hmm. Well, it is a blank slate ideology, and by failing to predict and anticipate the pitfalls of human behavior, we bring out the very worst in human behavior. We fail to put in place structures to reward better behavior or punish bad behavior. I mean, it's a recipe for disaster, really.
Exactly. I mean, you can't, right? I mean, one of the fundamental problems with humanity is that we are fundamentally selfish, and it doesn't mean, and that's not a moral. I'm not making a moral pronouncement there. I'm just making a statement of fact. Every single animal every single animal wants to survive, and so we behave in ways that sort of further that goal at the expense of others, literally at the expense of others. Only when it comes to kin or reciprocal or altruism do we get real any kind of altruism at all. So the idea that if you just unleash everybody and just allow them to do whatever they want, that we're going to get a better outcome, I mean, it flies in the face of reason. And I think that the libertarian would answer, I don't care. Freedom matters more to me than any of that. And my answer to that is, you are living in you are a horrible deontologist. This is exactly why I fucking hate deontology so much. And you know how I hate deontology. I rail against it all the time, because this idea that the abstract idea of liberty or freedom is more important than the practical outcomes for real living people is it's appalling, Sean. It's appalling.
Yeah, it's appalling, and you're right to be upset. I'm upset too. I'm only laughing because it's so absurd.
Yeah, exactly. No, please laugh because it is so fucking absurd.
I mean, I'm just describing here what we're both talking about is the basic social contract, and libertarianism is anti-social contract. It's anti-system. It's anti-accountability. And what I can say about this is that, you know, failing to plan is planning to fail. I know it's a fucking cliche. I hate cliches, but it's fucking true.
It's a good cliche, man. You know, cliches have some basis in reality. There's a reason why they're cliches, you know?
Yeah, well, you know, failing to plan for human civilization, that includes, you know, how we're going to get energy in 100 years from now, not just now, and how we're going to feed ourselves 100 years from now, not just now. And if we have too much liberty, that's going to be a return to feudalism. We're not going to, those people are not going to be fed. We're not going to have energy in 100 years. We're not going to have a civilization. And because what we do when we have too much liberty is we encourage the aggregation of power that is accountable to no one. Hello, Elon Musk. Nobody tells Elon Musk what to do on Mars.
Yep.
You know?
Yep.
So
that's exactly right.
Nobody tells Jeff Bezos what to do. Nobody tells the Koch brothers what to do, or one of them's dead now. But anyway,
I'm sorry. I don't feel bad about laughing at that at all, because those guys are responsible for countless deaths and suffering. The suffering that those two people have unleashed through their tentacles, like Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell, they have unleashed. We are this country, we are having the discussion we had earlier on this show about the end of democracy because of people just like that.
Well, that's right. And so once those unaccountable centers of power have been established, they often exceed the power of weakened governments, and they try to weaken the government. I mean, Citizens United was an assault. Citizens United was an assault on our government.
Absolutely. And they don't even pretend. They want government to be small enough, quote, so that it can be small enough so that it can be drowned in a bathtub. That is a position. That is a quote. That's an actual quote. I'm trying to think of who said it, but that's an actual quote, right? And I'll
tell you who it was. It was Grover fucking Norquist, that little toad.
That piece of fucking garbage. But this is what I'm talking about. Like, this is the ideology we're dealing with, right? And so the question becomes, what do you do when there is no government? That means might makes right? That's it.
And that's it. And the definition of law and accountability is it's not optional. You don't get to buy your way out of this.
Yeah, exactly. You don't get to fucking buy your way out of the laws. You know, it's really interesting. This is a really great distillation of this problem in the context of COVID-19. And I'm not going to get into any names, but a big company with a person that I know who I'm very close with works at this company. And they have been going to work from time to time, like every couple of weeks. They have to go to work for a couple of days of the week. And the bigwigs at the company have been going to work the entire time, right? So these are very, very wealthy, mostly guys, very, very wealthy people, and they are used to flying around in private jets, all that. And so for them, you know, COVID restrictions. They walk around the office with no masks. They don't follow social guidance. They don't self quarantine because they fly on the private planes all the time. They go all over the place. They don't self quarantine. None of that. And so my point is that these guys are so rich that they're so used to being able to do whatever they want, right? So they are able to buy themselves out of any situation, right? Like they're rich. They're used to having little people just cater to them. And so the idea that they suddenly have to follow rules that everyone else has to follow, like wear a mask.
Their heads are exploding.
Their heads are exploding. They cannot handle it, Sean. They cannot handle it. And they're and what they're doing is they're setting a terrible example, because then they go into the office and then everyone else feels pressure to go into the office too, even though they don't want to go into the office. And by the way, those people the little people are not going to get that excellent health care. They're not going to be able to pay those awful bills. They are not going to be, if they don't go to work, they don't get paid, right? So and again, this is what happens when people are unaccountable.
Furthermore, Trump's not the only one mask shaming, right? I can guarantee you there are CEOs saying, don't wear that goddamn mask. Nobody's sick here.
Exactly.
You know?
Exactly.
So, and this brings us back to our section here, and that is that freedom and accountability are always opposite. And so libertarians, there's no way you can be for absolute freedom without also being for getting rid of accountability. these things are always at the very least in tension with one another.
That's so fucking important. We'd like to extract quotes from this show to talk about later on. Like that's it. Like, you cannot have ultimate freedom. Freedom and accountability are in tension. They are in tension.
And all of everything that the entire law, our entire government is about balancing those things. And these guys are taking a wrecking ball to it.
Exactly.
So I've got to address freedom of thought, though, because this isn't just about behavior. There are many divides between libertarianism and social contract-based systems, but the first would be libertarians often assert in various forms that ideas have rights of their own. You hear them sometimes talk about viewpoint diversity. They're trying to apply this to ideas, just like the left talks about diversity of people. They're trying to apply this diversity to ideas. And
Sam Harris is horrible on this too, for the same reason.
There's a whole bunch of them. Dave Rubin, all these guys. The entire intellectual dark web. But this is fucking posers. All right. I mean, they are just so. They're taking a wrecking ball to truth and justice. So they can't have it both ways. They can't say that the expression of any and every idea is sacrosanct. And this is where John Stuart Mill starts to veer into awful territory, because he says, and this is what people like Sam Harris and all these guys base this idea of absolute intellectual freedom on. Mm-hmm. John Stuart Mill says, if all mankind minus one were of one opinion and only one person were of the contrary opinion, mankind would be no more justified in silencing that one person than he, if he had the power, would be justified in silencing mankind. Now that is head exploding horse shit right there.
Right.
Does this apply to Hitler, to eugenics, to the assumption of superior races? I mean, shouldn't we silence Nazis? This is where this goes, and this is why this thing that, bringing it back to what you said about Eric Trump. Okay, this is actually their position. Their position is we may be Nazis, but you're silencing us, and therefore you deserve to lose. This is right from John Stuart Mill.
Yep. So I'm gonna ask the question from the libertarian perspective now to you, because I think it's an important thing for our listeners to think about. And that is, the counter argument would be, or one of the counter arguments would be, look, the solution to bad speech is more speech, right? So yeah, sure, there's Nazis, and there's Nazis, and they're going to say fucked up Nazi shit. But what we need to do is let them talk. And then we should instead talk about anti-Nazi stuff a lot, and hopefully we'll be louder. So how do you respond to that, Sean?
Well, a couple of things. The first thing is that a lot of wealthy people have a big megaphone. And a lot of wealthy people, as we've seen, are trying to destabilize society. And so what they're doing is, obviously these guys aren't white supremacists, but they are using white supremacy to usher in a fascist libertarian government that gives them everything they want in terms of corporate power. And so this is the problem is, Karl Popper talked about the paradox of tolerance. If you have an open society and you want to keep that open society, you cannot allow ideas that promote a closed society to flourish. And what I mean by flourish is you can't allow them to become a part of your educational institutions. You can't allow them to be a part of your huge media that is being broadcast to millions or billions of people. And if you do, you will lose your open society, because those ideas can tend to be persuasive to some people, and they will then vote away their democracy.
That's exactly right. And to be clear, everybody, I was taking a devil's advocate position. That is not my position. To be very fucking clear, what I'm saying, but I just think it's an argument that needs to be batted down decisively. And what I would add to what you said, Sean, and I think what you said was great. What I would add to that, or sort of piggyback on, is that ideas that, like those that are spewing out of the conservative media ecosystem, as funded by Koch brothers and et cetera, these ideas are intuitive to the human brain, right? They lodge themselves in very well. They really are consistent with our evolutionary impulses, right? Our in-group, out-group sort of impulse, which is one of the strongest ones we have. We talked about that last week, about how racism is in some ways very, very natural and normal. And we should expect that from human beings. Tribalism, right? We talk about things like submitting to authority. Right. All of these ideas are things that are things that are sexy. Right. You know what's not sexy? What's not sexy is accountability and representative government. And these things aren't sexy in the same way as I can take care of your problems for you.
It's always accountability is always a hard sell, but tribalism is a lever. It's a scab that can be picked over and over and over again. You can get people to do whatever you want.
Whatever you want.
Picking that scab of tribalism and blaming it on the other, scapegoating. It is dictatorship 101 to do this stuff. So that is why all ideas should not be welcome in an open society. And here's the thing. The idea of absolute freedom of conscience and viewpoint diversity, it logically asserts that we do not learn from history. If all ideas are equal, why have universities? Why teach anyone anything? We go to university to learn what's right, and that requires rejecting what's wrong. The motto of my alma mater, which is Northwestern University in Evanston, it's "Que cum que sunt vera." That means whatsoever things are true. This is from Philippians 4:8. Finally, here's the whole quote. "Finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, if there be any virtue and if there be any praise, think on these things." Imagine the people who are arguing that we should not think on those things.
Yeah. I mean, what you just read reminds me of the quote that is falsely, apparently inaccurately attributed to Carl Sagan, which is, if it can be destroyed by the truth, it should be destroyed by the truth. And I'm paraphrasing there, but that's the gist. And I think
maybe it was Hitchens. It might have been Hitchens.
Might have been Hitchens. Yeah, but
I don't know. We don't know here, but we'll figure it out. We'll put that in the show notes.
We'll figure it out. We'll put that in the show notes because I think that is one of my favorite statements. And it's multiple, there's multiple prongs there. One, I think one of the important prongs is what we're talking about here, which is like, there are things that are correct or more correct, and there are things that are wrong and or more wrong, and we shouldn't pretend like those things are equal. Secondly, and this is what I really love about it, is that it's this idea that, like, just because let me make an analogy or use an example. Some people say, yeah, well, even if God is not real, or even if religion is not true, it still brings value to people. So why shouldn't we support that, right? And my answer to that is exactly that quote. If it can be destroyed by the truth, it should be destroyed by the truth, because we are better off as a society if we're operating on facts.
Well, and that's it. When we do learn from history, when we do learn from the sciences, when we do study the wisdom of the ages, the main thing and the first thing that we learn is that certain ideas must be disqualified.
Yep.
And it's always a debate. It's always a debate in academia.
Of course, and it should be.
But if we should have that debate without rehashing things that the vast majority of academics would say, no, that's a terrible idea. That's a wrong, terrible idea. And in fact, they have said that. And what has happened is that the libertarians, whether, from the Murdochs to the Kochs to whoever, people who want to keep their money is basically what we're talking about here.
Literally. That's exactly right.
They have put their thumb on the scale. They have actually started think tanks. They have funded universities so they could get their libertarian nonsense into academia, because they knew they lose when on the history, on the sociology, on the economics, they lose. And so what do? They buy the department.
Exactly. And this goes right to, there's a couple things that come to mind right away. And that is, I was talking about in 2008 and 2012 with those decisions that really, right, instead of trying to win on the merits, They just change the rules, right? Because their ideas are terrible. They're terrible. They are deeply, deeply unpopular. It turns out that normal everyday citizens do not want to cede all of their power to private interests. Who knew? Turns out that is not very popular. So instead, what they do is they change the rules. I'm thinking of, right, you talk about not rehashing bad ideas, right? The Supreme Court put to bed, we hoped, the idea that that gay people shouldn't get married. That's a terrible idea, right? That's a terrible, terrible idea. It's violative of our deepest principles, and it is based on bigotry and religious authoritarianism. That is why we got rid of that idea. It is terrible, right? And now we are now dealing with people on the Supreme Court, Sean, that are going to rehash these ideas. They are salivating, licking their lips, waiting for somebody to bring this back to the court. Clarence Thomas has been waiting for years for this to happen. And this is right. And so now we are rehashing ideas that are already settled law. They're already settled law. We're doing this as a society now with fascism. As a human civilization, we're doing this with fascism. We decided back in 1946 that fascism is a bad idea, right? And here we are again. It's back.
Well, and this goes back to what you talked about at the end of the show last week, and that is Clarence Thomas's hypocrisy. Here he is, somebody who is married to a white woman. Miscegenation used to be illegal. I mean, I hate that word. That word is it's disgusting. It's despicable.
It's disgusting. It really is.
So, but he is somebody who could not have married his wife under the laws of the 1950s and 1960s. And now he is thinking about invalidating other people's marriages.
Unreal. It's unfucking real, man.
It's insane.
Unfucking real. And this is what we're dealing with. And this is what we're dealing with, sort of undoing these ideas. I mean, the king of bad faith libertarianism, what's his face? Not Ron, Rand Paul, right? And he is saying, like, he backed off of this when he was running for president or running for something. He was running for president. Wasn't he running for president once? I don't know, whatever. It doesn't he backed off of this, but his original thing was like, oh yeah, or maybe it was Ron Paul that took this position, but that Brown v. Board was a bad decision, was the wrong decision, right? And that's
the decision that allowed that allowed schools to remain segregated, correct?
No, it desegregated the Brown v. Board desegregated the schools and
desegregated, right? Okay, that's what I meant. Yeah, I'm sorry.
That's what you meant. I assumed that's what you meant. But yeah, that was a really important decision. But he suggested that was wrongly decided. And again, this is another example of rehashing old bad ideas. That should not be part of the conversation, the debate we're having as a society right now. Those ideas are terrible.
Well, and here's another one, and I'm about to launch into, because this is really what this is all about. The biggest terrible idea that must and should be disqualified in the modern era is the libertarianism. And I don't mean liberty, I mean the anti-government nonsense that demonizes socialism. Socialism is this is the scare word that they have scared the entire country into voting for Republicans over and over again. And even worse than libertarians are the more anarchist strains that demonize statism. They want to eliminate government entirely. So you have the libertarians hate socialism, anarchists hate statism, and honestly, the two are kind of combining to the point where it's really kind of hard to tell them apart, because the Republicans and the Republican Party as well has sort of merged into this, and they are just slashing and burning the government. But we have to go back to the language on this. In stark contrast to democracy, which means rule by the people, socialism means an economy for the people. Libertarianism, on the other hand, concerns itself almost entirely with private property.
Yeah, we talk about this too a lot on the show, right? That this idea that property is more important than individuals. That the, again, abstract principles are more important than practical outcomes for real people.
It's tied together, because libertarians, they loudly trumpet that people should be free to do whatever they want, but the subtext is with their property.
Exactly.
And so that leads to all this taxation is theft nonsense. And what they don't understand, taxation is theft. This is what they say, and they say it with a straight face, and it's so.
I'm sorry. Whenever I hear somebody say, like if you're in a thread, you're not a big Instagram person, but I know Jillian's on Instagram sometimes, and if you click on any political thing and you go into the comments, and then there's always the Trump 20, people just say, just yell, and like
Trump 2020, yeah,
Trump 2020, and then run away, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of times they're bots, but a lot of times they're like, a young kid, like it's always a kid with like camo and like holding a fish in his profile picture. It's like always that kid, or the pickup truck in his profile picture. It always is. But like the taxation is theft is a very similar thing, right? It's just sort of this sort of like this statement of, I don't even know what it's supposed to mean, because it has no intellectual legs at all. So it's but it's just like a rallying cry.
These are guys who don't make that much money, and so they really don't know what paying taxes even is, hardly.
Right,
Exactly. But what they also don't understand is wage theft. I mean, a lot of these guys are working for companies that are just making bank off their labor, and they're getting paid next to nothing. And so they don't seem to care about that. They're just mad at the big bad government. And what they also don't understand about this whole kind of concept, it's a fetish. It's become a shibboleth of libertarianism. Taxation is theft. They just repeat it like a mantra.
Yep.
And taxation, it's got a greater philosophical and governmental purpose. It's not just to pay for government services. It's also to prevent the development of robber barons and, by extension, warlords.
Exactly. So
because
important.
If you can buy, all these luxuries that these guys buy, you can also buy an army. I mean, you could literally set yourself up as a warlord. And that is why governments should not allow billionaires to exist. It's insanity. And, when fortunes get that large, they become an impediment to governance. They can buy media, they can buy elections, they can do all these things. So, and this is what former Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis actually said, and this is a really profound quote.
Brandeis is a god. Love that guy.
He says we can have democracy in this country, or we can have great wealth concentrated in the hands of a few, but we can't have both. So that is why taxation is not theft. Taxation is democracy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. So, and this is there's also another thing that they do, another dodge that they do, and that is conservative libertarians often describe themselves as classical liberals because
they
don't like the idea that liberals are.
Here's another one. It's not what you don't understand, says the white dude with like a fedora and like a big beard and like drinking an IPA on his cafe racer and talking about how much he hates liberals, is that we don't live in a democracy. We live in a republic.
A republic.
Boom,
right.
mind blown. Oh my God, checkmate. I'm going the fuck home. Who knew we live in a fucking, shut the fuck up. Of course we live in a republic. That's not the point. Anyway, that was my rant.
And you're completely right, because that guy has never been to a basic political philosophy course, doesn't understand the difference between direct democracy and representative democracy or any of it. He doesn't understand the Constitution, why we have, anyway, blah, blah, blah.
The worst.
But, when you hear this, when you hear republic from guys like that with their fucking IPAs, you're talking to people who support minority rule. They support hierarchy. They support wealth. They support private property. They're not liberals. They are conservatives. And this is what, we can't let them get away with this stuff, even in conversation.
Exactly. Absolutely not. Call them out, because that is complete bullshit. Unless if you think there is nothing liberal in the modern sense of the accumulation, the unchecked accumulation of wealth and power literally at the expense of democracy.
Well, that's it. And so they always talk about private property. And we have to make a distinction that's important here, because these guys, they play on this all the time with their little disingenuous lies. Private property is not personal property. In this conversation, the distinction I'm making is between property that you use for yourself versus property you own as an investment. In the sense that your home is personal property, even though it is in the category of what would be described as real property, it's for yourself, not to collect rents. So we're not saying we're against fucking personal property or people having their private homes. And this these guys, I mean, this dumb troll who came to our Facebook page. I mean,
yes.
We got a libertarian troll on our Facebook page, folks. And you really have to hear this to believe it. He says, because I was talking about private property, and he says, go ahead and stick a sign on the door of your home that states that anyone at all times can come in and utilize your amenities, kitchen, bathroom, bedroom, and all free of charge. Because guess what? Having personal property in your mind is a human rights violation. It's like,
I mean,
no.
no, literally no one is saying that. Like that, you want to talk about a straw man? I mean, you are fighting against a position that I have not taken. No one is saying that. Literally no one is saying that.
No one. And it's like, no, dumbass, that's personal property and everyone is entitled to security and privacy. That's a basic requirement of civilization. Go home, you're drunk. You know?
What a fucking shitbag. Unbelievable.
I mean, they really are that disingenuous, and that's what is so horrible about dealing with these guys, and why the Republicans they were geniuses to tap into these idiots.
Definitely. And look, I mean, it is, and I've pointed this out a lot in the past. It is not a coincidence that the typical libertarian is a white, relatively well-off man, that, because. That of course you want no rules because you are already on top of the pyramid. So you are going to be the boss. You just don't want to have anybody to compete with you. You already have you're the Koch brothers. You have a gigantic head start, come on.
Well, this is what they're not understanding about the argument. And that is that it is the collection of rents that leads to class stratification. Private property beyond what you can personally use leads to the formation of a rentier class. That's the French word for people who collect rent. And that leads to vast economic inequality. The rentier class is directly responsible for poverty. That money that's going into their pockets that's not being taxed or taxed sufficiently is coming out of the mouths of children.
That's absolutely right.
And we're not saying that no one should be able to own property and rent it out. We're not going after mom and pop landlords. We're saying that people with large fortunes who collect rents on a grand scale should give back through the paying of higher taxes. And that is all of what, like, the Democratic Party has taken the barest steps, like, oh, we're going to raise taxes on people making over $400,000 a year. But are they going to raise them enough? No.
Of course they won't.
They won't. And this is because
it's politically unviable to do so. Right? And this is really important, I think, because, and as I always say, I'm an Obama Democrat, and Obama's big on this. And he says, he was asked recently why he remains hopeful in the Trump era. How does he live through the Trump era, watching his legacy being torn down? And he says, because I know that the progress is not in a straight line, right? We go backwards, we go forwards, we go up, and we go down. The question is, on balance, do we move forward? And so we take what we can get. We fight, we compromise, and then we come back to fight another day. And so we should expect Democrats to have, half the country does not agree with us. Even if they hate Donald Trump, they do not agree with us. And we have to find a way to live with them. So I just wanted to bring that up just because, no, the taxes are not going to be raised enough. But
no, that's important.
They'll be raised.
Well, and here's where we have to go. This is what we have to understand is that without sufficient taxation, the rentier class of investors will take a greater and greater share of the world's wealth and political power. It will never stop. It's not going to go back the other way.
Never.
And this is the entire subject of Thomas Piketty's excellent book, Capital in the 21st Century, which is it's a reference to Das Kapital, right? Because Marx wrote this thing in the 18th century or 19th century, and now we have a completely different set of economic circumstances, but the wealthy are still in charge.
It's so funny because people like to think that Marx was discredited after the collapse of the Soviet Union, but that's not true at all. I mean, Marx, right? Like the idea of the communist of a communist utopia is
probably not going to happen.
It's probably not going to happen. But the basic foundations, the ideas of late capitalism, right? The idea of the capitalist cycle, the idea of the bourgeois class, and labor as opposed as distinct and different from capital, like those ideas were absolutely on point, and they're as relevant as ever. Well,
I wish libertarians were as upset about surplus value being harvested from their labor as they were.
Yeah, exactly.
about taxes.
Yeah, exactly.
And here's the thing. There's not that many members of the rentier class, okay? There's only a few thousand billionaires in the entire world, around 3,000 billionaires.
Wild. That's wild.
It's not just them. People worth more than about $1 million control about half the world's total wealth, and that share is increasing. So I think we're going to have to do a show on economic inequality. That's not the point I'm trying to make here. I'm just saying there's only a few of them. They have names and addresses. They have bank accounts, and we could tax the hell out of them and use that money to rebuild our world and eliminate poverty forever. It's not utopian. It's possible.
Yep. You remember Utopia for Realists? Excellent book. Anybody out there, read that book. That is an outstanding book on this very issue. We can do it.
Yeah, and so with strong democratic governance, the rich would A, have never gotten that rich, and B, they wouldn't be able to keep all that money. With democratic governance, we could and would abolish poverty. And why haven't we done this? Why don't we vote the bastards out who protect the rentier class and private property? Wouldn't that be in everybody's interest? Well, they have gotten their hooks into people and scared them with socialism.
Yeah,
you can't do it. You're accused of socialism. You try to do anything, you're accused of socialism. And it's created a political third rail. And it's the single reason why we have homeless people, why we don't have health care, why 15 to 20% of American children go to bed hungry, why our public schools are failing, why many urban people of color turn to lives of crime instead of pursuing lives of knowledge and productivity. It's all that suffering is caused by this rentier class and by the obscuring of the reality with that scare word, socialism.
Yeah, totally. And that I really respect Bernie Sanders on this point, right? For just walking straight into it. He waiting because you needed somebody who was at least socialism is not a scary word on the left anymore, right? Let's set aside the centrists, but on the left, on the true left, like it is not a scary word anymore. It's still obviously terrifying on the right, but this is something that Bernie Sanders, to his credit, has mainstreamed at least democratic socialism.
Yeah, and it should be democratic. I mean, it's kind of these semantic games are not really all that meaningful because
no, they're not. They're not. But that's an important branding from a branding perspective. It's super important, right? Democratic socialism now all of a sudden, because people think socialism is fascism or socialism is Venezuela or socialism is Soviet era communism, right? And that also, but those are authoritarian regimes. That's not the same thing. So when you throw democratic socialism in front of it and you point to Germany, all of a sudden it starts to make more sense.
Well, this is just it, is that functional democratic socialism has proven tremendous benefits all over Europe with much greater levels of health and happiness than Americans could ever dream of, even Canada. So, I mean, social spending has been cut drastically in America since the election of Ronald Reagan, and it's one of the first things he did was to cut taxes and social spending. And this word socialism has been used by libertarians to scare Americans into accepting artificially imposed poverty for nearly half a century.
That's another quotable one, man. That's another quotable.
Well, just think it's been 25 years since Hillary Clinton first tried to take the first steps toward universal health care. President Obama nearly got it done in 2010, but Joe Lieberman torpedoed the public option. He wouldn't go for it.
Yep.
And how many people have died because of that one decision?
Oh my God.
And furthermore, the public option would have not run into the constitutional issues that caused the individual mandate to be invalidated by the Supreme Court.
Sure.
So, that's something that little sabotage right there is I can't even overstate how horrible that is. And yet, even though we didn't have a public option, the Republicans still tried to repeal Obamacare more than 60 times. And the Supreme Court is poised literally this week to undo that program entirely. And I mean, some powerful people just don't want Americans to have health care or any other benefits.
Yeah, I mean, and it's so funny because on the right, they are always talking about it's the radical left, it's the communists, it's the feminists or the baby killers, et cetera. And the boogeyman, the real boogeyman is, and first of all, I'm not a big fan of the idea of a boogeyman in general. I think it's for the same reason I'm not a fan of people being put on superhero pedestals. Usually it's a system, right? It's a system and a set of incentives. And what we're dealing with is a insurance industry, mostly, right? And healthcare industry, drug industry, powerful people that are saying like, no, we like the way things are. We make money off of people's deaths. We want people to go broke, trying to pay their insurance because or trying to pay their medical bills because we get to make a lot of money off of it. And it's really just as simple as that. It's really just as simple as that. From the Koch brothers on down, it's a bunch of individuals, selfish individuals that we talked about earlier in the show. Individuals are selfish. They think about their own self-preservation, their own and their own status. And the result is torpedoing legislation that will save hundreds and thousands of lives.
Well, and this is
be cheaper.
And it would be cheaper. It would be cheaper and better, but it cuts out the middleman. And
exactly,
this is why most people in America would vote for universal health care. People who are over 65 love their Medicare.
Definitely.
And even to the extent where they were saying government hands off my Medicare, right?
Yeah,
and
which is the fun,
they love their Medicare. And so if we expanded Medicare to age 60 and then 55 and then on down, it would be extremely radically popular.
Yep.
But if we try to talk about universal health care, then all of a sudden it's socialism.
Exactly.
And these guys are walking a very fine line because they know that once Americans figure this out, the jig is up. It's but so they continue to demonize, and this is what we talked about before. Along with the word socialism has come a whole grab bag of ugly, just world fallacy nonsense, like meritocracy, like laziness, shiftlessness, calling people parasites and looters and moochers, words which have always been directed disproportionately at people of color, and by contrast, used to justify the vast wealth that's being hoarded at the top as somehow meritorious. I mean, did I miss anything? Can you think of any other insults that are directed at the poor?
Oh my God. I can't, but I can't say how important this is. And the just world fallacy, as you know, is a hobby horse of mine, a hobby horse of ours on this show. And obviously the term that we have based our Medium publication on. And look, I mean, this kind of, I want to connect this to the sort of religious thinking, right, and the religious authoritarianism and the hierarchy that comes that is really part and parcel of the right. The idea that everyone is where they should be because they have earned their way there, which is obviously not true. I am okay. Like naturally, we talk about the different distinction between natural hierarchies, right? People that are, let's say, I'm better at X, Y, and Z than these people are, and therefore I have leadership skills or whatever it is, and I naturally become a leader. Let's say that's one kind of hierarchy, but that is a meritorious hierarchy. But that's not what we're dealing with in American society. That's not what we're dealing with in global society. It is not a meritorious hierarchy. It is essentially an arbitrary hierarchy with people idle rich, getting richer and making more money without actually conferring any real benefit to society.
Well, this is just it. And if somebody, makes $1 billion on a stock trade, and there's lots of those guys out there, and they're mostly guys, let's be honest.
Let's be honest.
When those young, able-bodied, self-made billionaires are laying around on their yachts, they're praised as being, self-made and all of that. And it's fine for them to lay around and collect their rents on their stock investments. But if someone is idled by unemployment or underemployment, or they're blamed for their own predicament. They should have worked harder. They should have gotten a better job. They should have went to school. All this victim blaming. And these libertarians are stark raving insane with their shaming of the lower rungs of society.
Absolutely. I can't. It's so awful. And again, it always demonstrates, we always see, like I said earlier, libertarians are never poor people.
No.
They're never.
Some of them are. Some of them are. I mean, some of these guys, a lot of Joe Sixpacks, I'm sorry, are libertarians.
That's a good point.
They really are the working poor, and they actually should make common cause with people of color because they both could get a hell of a lot better deal.
Oh, that's really interesting. That dovetails with the book that I've been reading, Du Bois, on Black Reconstruction in America. And he hammers on this all the time, is that, right, that the poor white sees himself as a future capitalist, not and does not see himself in solidarity with the Black worker.
And this is our final segment here that I want to talk about, which is Ayn Rand and her influence and this idea, the virtues of selfishness and self-interest. I mean,
Ayn Rand.
Okay, like she's despicable. Okay,
despicable.
At the end of Atlas Shrugged, the protagonists fly off to the mountains in a private jet as they watch the cities of America's eastern seaboard going dark and collapsing into chaos. And the crime of the civilization in her eyes was that the teeming, lazy, grifting masses didn't pay enough attention or give enough respect or money to the wealthy. And this is where it all becomes impossible to ignore. Libertarianism is an ideology of supreme selfishness. Adherents of this ideology are possibly the only people in the world who still don't think capitalism is selfish enough.
Unbelievable. Unreal.
We had the same troll, the libertarian troll on our Facebook page. He was saying essentially, I have to read his stuff so that you know the mentality that we're dealing with. I know this is going long, but you gotta understand it. This is our definitive statement on libertarianism, and these guys, true libertarians, they know exactly who they are. They're the only ones who think that they operate in rational self-interest. Everybody else of course, doesn't understand their own interests, right?
Exactly. And everyone else, always, of course.
So we posted, if anybody thinks that we should have a civilization that works together and cooperates, they're idiots.
Yep, exactly. They don't understand that, they're intellectually inferior somehow.
Yeah.
There is no more arrogant group than the libertarians. I mean, the arrogance is astonishing.
And what pisses them off the most is if you attack one of their heroes. Because, this guy who is this troll, he wants to fucking be Mark Zuckerberg. And we posted a meme making fun of Mark Zuckerberg because we love to rip on him because the guy just doesn't care about democracy at all.
Nope.
And so we posted this meme and it was Zuckerberg next to Data. And we were talking about, who is having a harder time becoming human. And it was pretty clear.
It's funny.
It wasn't Data who was having a hard time being human. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Data's more human than Zuckerberg will ever be.
Yeah. So this idiot says, well, exactly. If you feel so strongly about it, get off. He's a libertarian who wants us to take our content off of Facebook because he says it's a business. It's meant to make a profit. It's fine to be honest about that, whether anyone who simultaneously uses it while discrediting it likes this reality or not. The truth is that our country was founded on the principle that a person has a right to free thought and enterprise. That's the truth of life. I have a self. It's in my nature to be selfish and want to do the things that I like and pursue my own wealth. No one lives for my sake. That would be slavery. No matter how much you dress it up with words of democracy, your sentiments on the subject make it an empty shell.
Unbelievable. Ugh.
This is it's straight out of Ayn Rand.
It is. I mean, that's Ayn Rand. It reflects precisely, almost exactly what we just read earlier about Ayn Rand. What you were just talking about earlier about Ayn Rand. I mean, this idea. And this is why it's so sexy to the people, to the libertarians like Paul Ryan, who is he's out of politics, thank God, but also one of the people that I couldn't hate anybody more, really, maybe Donald Trump, but this idea, it's like a retroactive justification for being for disproportionate power and wealth. Like, that's all libertarian is, and Ayn Rand is the epitome of that.
Yeah, and so I replied to him. Obviously, I said I really didn't want to engage with this guy, but I thought maybe he was worth talking to. I said we take a dim view at the radical secular of your narrow concept of self-interest. We encourage everyone to consider the systemic impacts of all their thoughts and behavior. Narrow self-interest is destroying civilization, not enhancing it. Given your right libertarian stance, it's not at all surprising you sided with Zuckerberg on this. I'd encourage you to reconsider whether this page is right for you and your relationship to your fellow humans.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I know.
And diplomatically done too. It would definitely like, you know, it didn't pull any punches, but it was definitely sounded like an organization's response.
Yeah, well, you know, he obviously didn't like that. He said, I am entirely self-interested and happy to be. My interests are the only interests I own. It's my mind I use to think with. My words are my own. I say this because I want to, no other reason. That's not destroying a country founded for the very reason of my having the right to the ability of the pursuit of my own personal wealth or the ability to speak freely. I'm only obligated to myself in that or any regard. Can you say that you've gotten permission from every person in the public that you claim to speak for when you invoke in the name of public good?
Wow. Ugh. Again, abstract principle over practical outcomes.
Yeah, I mean, the dude's a classic Randroid. And of course, the public good that I'm talking about and that you talk about, Christophe, it's based on objective measures of human flourishing.
Exactly.
And, you know, this is about all I can take of this. And so we got to wrap this up. But we have to connect these libertarian ideas to their consequences, because we have to remember that Trump is Trump and he's nasty and people can't stand him. But Paul Ryan, Mitch McConnell, Rand Paul, Ron Paul, all these other people,
that whole crew.
I could name off the entire crew. Devin Nunes. You know, there's just a ton of them. They would do all of the same things, and they might be a little nicer about it.
Yeah, they would do it right. I mean, this is why I heard this point made earlier this week, and that is John Roberts is a political hack too. He's just a much smarter and more talented and cunning political hack, right? They're all doing the same fucking thing, which is trying to privatize government, because that is their ideology, and they don't care about what happens to anybody. It's a pursuit of power for its own sake, really, but shrouded in the idea that there is some sort of abstract principle that matters to them. But really, it's just selfish, wanton pursuit of power.
Yeah. And really, it's, you know, when you let these guys go to their logical conclusion of unlimited aggregation of wealth, you know, it's going to take the food out of the mouths of children. It kills people. It destroys civilization. It's really no different than slavery or Nazism.
Exactly right. That's exactly right. It's genocidal. I mean, at the end of the day.
Yeah. So we hope that many Americans will vote on Tuesday to put the interests to not put the interests of the rentier class above their own, because that's what we're really talking about. Trump is a symptom of a larger problem. Mm-hmm. And if we can't figure this out as a nation, if we can't get ourselves out of this intellectual trap of our own making, I suppose we really don't deserve the benefits of a civilization. We can go be like those places in Africa that don't have democracy and that are struggling with it, struggling to survive. So smash libertarianism.
Fuck you, libertarianism. Fuck you.
Fuck you. All right, Christophe, let me kick it over to you for our search below the radical radar.
Yes, Sean, let's do this. So Trump at his COVID-19 super spreader rally events has been doing this sort of bizarre old like white dude dance as if he were at his first concert, and as if real artists take him seriously. It's this weird, I don't even know how to describe it.
He's just rocking. He's just
rocking back and forth and like moving his hands back and forth. My favorite is when he just moves his hands and nothing else. It's like, what are you doing up there? So anyway, so Sean, let's talk music. What is the last concert you went to, and did Jillian come with you?
We went to see Sons of Apollo in LA at the end of January. And that's the last time we've been anywhere. It was in a tiny little club. It was at the Whiskey, actually.
Nice.
So yeah, we saw it was a big band. They're a Dream Theater side project, and there was 500 people packed into that place like sardines. And it's one of the best concerts I've ever been to. I was like 10 feet away from Mike Portnoy.
Oh, that's amazing. That's amazing.
How about you?
Yeah, so the last show I went to was a punk rock show, and so right in punk rock world, we call them shows, whether or not they're regardless of the size. But it was a Bad Religion show, of course, my favorite band like ever, and I went with my brother Justinian. Shout out Justinian. And we both love Bad Religion, but it was just an amazing show. Should I say this? I guess I'll say this. So let's put it this way. I was on some experience enhancing products. And it was awesome. It was one of the best shows I've ever seen. And it was the last show that I saw. And the first show that I saw ever in my life was a band called Face to Face, another Southern California punk band in Manhattan. But hopefully that Bad Religion show wasn't the last show that I'll ever see, because I don't think I'm gonna be going into a concert or a show for a very, very long time. I can remember back when it didn't seem reckless and dumb to go to a show. Now it seems like I just can't imagine what that would be like to do it at this point. But anyway, okay, just like that, we've checked below the radical radar. I'm gonna kick it back to you, Sean.
Yeah, well, our third and final segment is called Radical Solutions. And of course, this one's going to be really short. This is where we explore what it means to approach life's problems from a radical secular perspective. And today we are confronting a presidential election. We've pretty much said everything there is to say about that. So our radical solution for you today is simple, and there's not much to say about it. This election is almost over. If you can phone bank on Monday and Tuesday and volunteer to contact as many people in the swing states as you possibly can, do that. And if you haven't voted, fucking vote, people.
Fucking vote.
And that's a mic drop. So, any final thoughts, Christophe?
No, man, except for look, everybody go vote. We're all exhausted. It's been an exhausting 4 years. We've held on. We have fought. We have clawed our way back. 2017, we stopped the Affordable Care Act from getting thrown out, right? 2018, we won the midterms, and we won interim races, et cetera. And now here is the final act. We have to finish this, cross the finish line. Everybody hold on. Let's do this.
Yes, let's do this. Well, once again, I want to remind you to make sure and subscribe to this podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're watching this on YouTube, be sure to hit that red subscribe button. Be sure to give us a 5-star rating on your podcast host and write us a review over at Apple. Positive podcast reviews at Apple will help us grow in their recommendations list faster than almost anything else. Tell your friends and family about our show. Word of mouth really matters. Check out the Just Words Fallacy Medium publication. The link is in the bio. And look, thank you everyone for being here and sticking with us through this ridiculously long show. And remember, wherever you are, you can be radically secular.